Well, I'm guessing they'll probably want to. Come on, you're not sure.
Good evening. Hello. How are you?
Yeah.
Wonderful. You?
Same, if not better.
That's always good news.
Hello. It feels good in here. It does feel good in here.
What's your name?
Why left? Nope. Nope.
Hello.
Nice.
Sign what does it say?
No assigned seats.
What's your name?
Except for you guys.
Oh, okay, no.
I hate working at the office. So back way on. You want to make your I think I got one on here. Yeah, man.
How are you this evening?
Wonderful. So, doesn't say that enough time during the day.
Yeah, well, that's very true.
Lawyer, I practice with. Fought. True. Sanders.
Right. How it should be. How it should be.
Yes, how it should. You don't want to even know this.
Oh, yeah. 6 by 9. Computer shop is off.
Computer's off?
The clock off by 2 minutes.
Pulls the guy down and goes.
I don't know why, but it's
One minute. Huh?
1 minute.
Yeah, 1 minute.
It's 6.
And that was 2 years. We had appointed 3 people to do a partition action. And he was going to. Well, it's 6 o'clock. We're here for a work session. I think at that point we can go back through and resolve all the unresolved issues. Does that sound like where we are to everybody? questions?
Well, from the new guys are gonna have questions that they want to talk about too.
Well, we'll start with that.
You want to just start at page 1 and go all the way back through like you did the first time? I just went page
Not
by page.
particularly, no. Remember, I ran out of voice and somebody had to sub for me. I'm assuming all the new people have done that
We don't have
already.
to read it.
I'm sorry.
We don't have to read it. We can just start with it.
Well, why don't we start right up here and go through?
And then they can say, well, hey,
If
let's talk about this
if
specific.
they want to
point.
talk about something before we get to something we all need to talk about,
Right.
then all I have to do is say something and we'll stop.
But let's not read it all again.
No, God, no. We'll bore the audience. They've already heard it once.
Oh, yes, please, let's not read it all again.
Okay, let's start scrolling.
Can I ask you a couple questions first off, Dick?
Sure.
Just so I can wrap my head around this, as I read through and this and that, is there any other literature that is going to be followed to build these farms? Or is this the only literature that the county has to build these farms?
My understanding is that the county used regulations for 4 different places in drafting this.
Okay.
I got a copy of Douglas County myself, because I figured if anybody was ahead of the game, it would probably be Douglas County. And I reviewed their regulations. But no, I don't, as far as I know, no.
So in Jackson County, the only literature that's going to base what decisions are made on is this Article 30.
Yes, Jackson, the county commissioner, county councilor, and the commission put this document together and submitted it to us as a starting point.
Okay.
And it's up to us then to modify it as we believe is appropriate.
Okay. So there's not somewhere else, some places that leave a lot of vague descriptions and not somewhere else to go find things. There needs to be.
Well, possibly in the
Well, I
manual.
think that the commissioners will have other agreements based on certain things, but yes, as far as the rules, what they would do, I think is all going to be in this.
What were the differences
I'm sorry.
between Douglas and Japanese? There's some very differences.
Not a lot of differences. Their sound is 60, which I think is where we're at. And their distance is 1,000 rather than 1360. Now, I'm sure there are others, but those are the 2 I was most interested in.
That's just available online.
Yeah, it is.
And then who's actually applying for this conditional use permit? Is it going to be the operator or is it going to be the owner?
Well, it's going to be, as far as we know, NextEra.
See, NextEra is the company, but
NextEra.
it would not be the landowner.
The landowner's not the
Landowner. They're going to lease it.
Because of the conditional use and the overlay district or whatever, any project or any piece of property they have leased would fall under that. So they would come in and apply for a permit for everything that they have, that they want to do.
Any company,
So they're going to apply one permit for the entire county. if they
conditional
want to.
use.
Well,
Yeah.
they'll have to be specific. What they're looking at, I think, is Limestone Springs and
Well,
Wilshire.
I mean, we don't, but the answer to your question is whatever company comes in here, they will apply for the conditional use, not the landowner.
Well, if a landowner wanted to build their own, though, they could apply for their own permit.
If they were doing
They can get
industrial,
financing.
if they were doing
That's what I mean.
industrial, commercial
I mean,
scale.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so it's the operator or the landowner.
basically the operator, yeah. I mean,
So if it's a lease, then it's not the landowner, it's the operator.
The operator makes the application.
And then the other question, I'm just trying to get into the big questions so I can wrap my head around what I read. Here in the regs, it says the operator, the party entity responsible for the construction. So I would assume that would be NextEra, for lack of a better name, right? And then on page 2, number 7, the owner is the party holding the title of ownership of the property. So when it says owner, are they talking about the landowner or is there another owner in this property?
Landowner.
So they will be the landowner. Okay. Because that'll clarify a lot of other questions that are. Because they use operator and owner in some weird spots to me.
There, and I did notice that there is some talk of that, of, yeah, owner versus operator, and what things that they may have.
They bounce back and forth several places, and I was just trying to clarify, if they say owner, are they talking about the landowner? Or is there another owner in this ordinance?
Two entities, the owner of the property and the operator in this. We pointed out, they could both be the same person, same individual. But this, in this instance, as far as we know, it's going to be operator and owner.
That gives me a start to my questions.
Okay.
I just want to clarify those before.
Sure.
we have any-
Sure. No problem.
So are you guys good on definitions?
There has to be a change in,
On which one?
solar module. It actually reads like it's the array.
So what should it be?
Well, a solar module is it's a solar panel, that's what that is. So that would be the definition. If you're trying to define a solar panel, that's what we do, but it looks like you're trying to define something else. An array is a group of modules or solar panels.
So module is another way of saying panel.
So, is it supposed to be like the?
So number 12 is where you have solar
Project
array.
area?
And that would be effectively the same inverter.
The solar array is correct, and the solar module is not.
Solar modules are nine. The definition of arrays is connected to an inverter.
So what's a grouping of solar arrays? What would be the word for that, or term for that?
I told you I was going to define that.
Because I think what they're trying to do is, in here it says that the arrays have to be a certain distance. They can't be farther than a certain distance apart. So that's why I think calling that a grouping of arrays needs a term, needs a definition. And that would be my only reason. I don't know anything about a solar module, but that would be my reasoning. I mean, as it says, it's separated from other modules by fencing, wildlife corridors. But there, in here it says, I think it's a half mile. They can't be any further than a half mile apart, but they can be separated by a road or a fence or whatever.
Right.
But
Yes.
So, and what is that point to that?
Just to get the definitions right.
So,
And then there's no other.
that really is modular panel, same thing.
yeah, let's mark that so we get better clarity on what to call it.
Yeah, maybe I can go, I was gonna, that's why I guess maybe I'll just count and see if they have it.
I would say most of this would probably mirror Douglas County.
Right above that, paragraph C, it says or battery storage, but it says later that we don't allow battery storage, is that correct?
I think that's correct.
So do we need to take that out? If we didn't write it down, we didn't have to, we need to take that out.
And where is
Is
that?
it a definition?
The-
of it?
It is in the definitions of commercial, paragraph C on page 3, the top, commercial utility scale solar energy conversion system. And then the third sentence up from the bottom, on the left side, it says, or battery storage. The system's connected to transfer take it out.
We need to go back and address that right off the bat. Who decided that we should have battery storage?
We did. We decided that,
And why?
because we decided we didn't want that in the county. So has it?
Well, no, you know, we should make decisions based on facts.
I think where they're building it, they don't need it.
Well, no, that's the issue right at hand with renewable energy, is that when the sun goes down and the wind stops blowing, it's done. And that is a big push, or that's a big driver in the industry, is improving battery technology and power. So that we improve solar panels and the latest technology is saltwater batteries. And so it's really just as benign as having a solar panel. That's why that's why I was like, why are we getting into such details that it's solar panels and batteries for ground-based? Because it's ground-based. You wouldn't have saltwater batteries in cars because of the heaviness.
Well, that's
It's not good for
The majority,
you. Safe.
majority of the commission didn't want batteries. I suggest we vote on that again.
Well, then, yeah, let me give you my speech, that it's just as benign as having a solar panel. It's salt water, it's not lithium.
And we've heard that.
Okay.
All in
I got
favor?
a question on that.
And it messes up the system by making that you're really, like, cutting the Achilles heel. It's really a discount. It's taken away some ability.
Bob, and that's, we can, because it's not an official vote. We're just voting amongst ourselves on whether we want to move forward. So I think, yeah, I mean, we have to say who's in favor of, that kind of thing. And that's what, the group that we had to start with, we went through this, and that was something that we were all comfortable with. And, yeah, you're welcome to make your case for it. It ultimately comes down to each of us saying
Right.
whether we want to go forward with that or not.
Right, and I must say, I appreciate you guys getting me up to speed with what was going on to get us here. And so now, we're gonna switch to talking about batteries for just a minute. He has a question first.
On battery, this is limited to commercial scale, right? This whole document, or when you talk about a battery, you're talking about a battery for all the scales, is it just the commercial? How does that read?
I think the very last line, page 30, paragraph 11, it's a permit for limited scale solar energy conversion. This is only talking about the commercial scale. The limited scale solar, they're only going to follow sections 1, 2, and 3, subsections 1 through 7. Only parts of it will be limited.
Or if it's personal, or private.
So it's allowed personally, based on this.
We don't have any regulations in this document for personal.
This is just commercials,
Yes.
okay? So, I would think, that just my own opinion, I would think that would be permitted separately. Whether it's allowed or not, it would be a whole different special use permit to allow that separate. If there was contention about whether battery storage is allowed, it wouldn't be allowed until regulations were developed and brought to that. I don't know how you word that, but that would be to say yes or no. I would think that for me, it would just be it needs to hold it for me. Yeah.
Which I don't think we have, there isn't any regulations on it personal. When you have to get a building permit, but.
Other than Article 30.
Are you saying a whole separate permit for if you want batteries?
On a commercial scale.
On the commercial scale?
Yeah, so if you're gonna put
Not, you're talking on what,
Yeah, we're
not
talking-
person, what we're talking about here, you're saying a
commercial
separate
scale, if
permit.
you were want to do a farm that had battery storage on site, and that was required, not, that was a different for me.
How would they,
Instead of just allowing it, or currently saying, no, it's not allowed, it's just.
And I think that may be a whole other process to go through to find out what kind, was saltwater or lithium or whatever.
Right, that would have to, you have to hold a deep dive into that and see, until that's allowed, you would have to make sure that those regulations around it. It's a whole other animal.
Well, right, that's the, what would we need set the regulations for to determine that it's a safe bet? Because right now, it's internal, it's almost like, yeah, if you didn't have a battery in your car, you wouldn't have to go out there and turn it. It could be considered internal to it in some places.
Well, I'll just ask this question, are there any current nationwide solar farms that use batteries?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And how large are
Uh,
they? I mean, I understand there's personal ones, because
Oh,
when I put my panels
we're
up, like,
talking big, we're talking gigawatt scale up. That's the latest ramp up in China, or they're trying to ramp up here. Over here.
I think for me,
I didn't bring examples. I didn't know we'd be able to.
I think that where we were at, and this, I'm speaking for myself, when we approached this topic was, for us in this county, we weren't comfortable with the current state of battery technology and the possible downsides to neighboring landowners. And we just said, we're not comfortable with that, we're not gonna do it.
Well, appreciate you saying that, and that's why my concern was is that their batteries, these aren't the same batteries that go in cars. And because you can just put it on land, you can build it out of, it's all, non-reactive kind of stuff, it's but the energy now, it discharges the energy. That's where it gets us, the electrical field is in the danger of electricity. But no, they don't explode and blow up from like lithium batteries. And next time I can bring some examples.
Well, I
And,
know,
but I like the idea that that way you're saying, well, we could even just say it right now. Not, no lithium battery.
That's where I think that it's, that's a whole other topic of conversation.
you see, there's, like, in the city of Minneapolis, where is it, Minneapolis, Kansas, they put a battery storage in the city because to offset the peak, to say, okay, solar doesn't come on until 9 AM, because so they wanted to be able to have the peak, so they were using that to shed the peak load. So you don't need to have a solar farm to have that, the company can put a solar farm here, and put battery storage in place to offset that. As a utility, members, you can do the same thing. So I would think it's a separate permitting, it's a whole other separate animal. So that.
I guess the way I look at it is if you don't have it in there and it goes to commissioners and they throw it back and say, you're gonna put something in there about batteries, and then you put something about batteries. That's my feeling. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong.
And I just wanted to make sure you guys knew that it's really not safe, we're not talking about lithium batteries. Talking about solar stuff.
well, that wasn't something that we needed scratched out, was it? I thought we got the regulations with no battery storage. Like that was, it came to us with no batteries storage in the county.
Reading this is reading what you guys went through, is reading all the hysteria about solar panels and trying to regulate things that really to over-regulating for dangers that are hardly exist. When it comes to ground-based batteries, that's one of those things. To me, a solar panel is about as benign as you can get, and a transformer, when it goes through a transformer, almost as benign as you could get, a baler burning down in your fields going to put more poison in your soil than a solar panel. So I'm just concerned that in general, we're trying to over-regulate stuff, and we can talk about,
And I think the majority of the board thinks it's better to over-regulate than under. Is there a motion to modify that? If there's no motion,
I'd like to make a motion to modify allowing variance.
is there a second? Motion dies for lack of a second. Let's move on.
On C, there's a highlight to say not to exceed acres. I know based on, I would, the overall county plan has a lot overall where development should be and where it shouldn't be. So, sticking with that is the way it's highlighted. We can talk about it, is there a discussion about that?
When we were going through the definitions, the acreage was covered later on. The acreage limits were covered later on, so we didn't know whether to put that in the definition. I think that's the only reason that it's there, and that's why it's scratched out, as we said, it doesn't need to be in the definition.
Because on page 7, if we, on the size of systems on the property, I think that's where it was covered at.
So 2,000 acres.
Yeah.
So if you were, no, I'm not even trying to think about what's being proposed or what's possibly being proposed, because it's supposed to be based on that, like, anything could come in based on this, you know. So, based on the plan that we have on the corridors, and the rural areas and where developed should be and where industrial should be, how does that 2,000 acres fit within the county, of Jackson County? If you're talking about a continuous, you've got a 2,000 square or rectangle, you can't take a farm, so we're gonna take farms here, here.
Correct, and I don't think that anyone would want to do that because of the infrastructure. But yes, it would be assumed, and that's where the setbacks and everything else comes into play, that it would be assumed that it would be in a
Continues.
somewhat contiguous group or close.
Yeah, makes sense.
And that's an assumption. It's not-
It's defined that way though, I believe. It has to be a contiguous.
And there are, they can't be more than so far apart, the arrays or mod, I mean, that's what mods is discussing was.
So, then how does that 2,000 acres fit in the county? You have 2,000, or based on the plan?
I don't follow your question, so.
Is that whether or not the John didn't ask?
Are you asking if there's 2,000 acres available within the county?
Well, you have certain places where 2,000 acres would be available for this development.
Okay.
You have 2,000 acres where it wouldn't be, based on the overall planning of the county, strategic thing,
And
right?
somebody didn't put one.
Well, that's my question, is how does that fit in there? Is there certain areas within the county that 2,000 area, that 2,000 acres would be allowed to develop? I mean, would there be certain areas where?
There is no stipulation in here where it is and where it isn't allowed. The thing that I think we talked about in that is that we're tasked with writing these regulations, but if it weren't for the imminent project out there, because same with you, I wanted to go through this without that project in
Yeah.
mind, but that's the whole reason we're doing this, is because there's a project on the horizon.
And if we made a good set of regulations, there could be more projects scattered around the county.
But that's also where we decided we weren't,
We decided
we didn't want that. We didn't want the entire county. Jackson County is an agricultural county.
Well, there sure is a lot of high voltage transmission lines going on Boston. And every one of them could be a possible attachment point.
It just takes a lot of land, and that's my contention, is it takes a lot of land.
So, that would be a question to ask a developer, what's the minimum amount of acreage that you would plant a solar system on in the transformers that get it onto the transmission line?
That number, that 2,000 was one that came from the commissioners. It was in the original draft. We saw no reason to change it.
So what's that mean then, on page 7, it talks about limited to more than one site
Meaning it can't be more than one 2,000 acre site.
in this county?
In a county.
So basically, this is just being written for the project.
And to eliminate any other project similar to it.
The part of the problem with Jackson County is there's not a lot of large land masses. It's all divided up. So you're dealing with non-participating landowners. And you're trying to protect those people and property values and things like that.
And you're walking on the rights of the people that want it.
But it's a minority.
It's still a landowner, and they still have property.
But if we have to protect, we have to
What are
go
you
with,
protecting them from? That's a good, what are we protecting them
devaluation of their property, the possibility of contamination or risk or.
from? Well, yeah, that's the hearsay. The property, devaluing the property is really about the only thing we're protecting them from.
That's enough.
Yeah, well, that is something to
I mean, that's,
talk about.
we're protecting the entire county based on a very small minority of property.
Well, those minority, well, hey, I guess that could go with changing in the future. I just wanted to make sure you guys realize that there's high voltage transmission lines going across this county. We wanted to find a map of it. That we wrote decent regulations that protected the landowners and the people and their neighbors. It's not calling landowners, but and protected neighbors from any hazards that might exist. There, we could open up, where there's a, people who want more solar panels. Right now, it's untested, unknown. Half the people, I queried 8 of my neighbors that have enough land that I think would be willing to develop. None of them wanted solar panels. Every one of them said, hey, my neighbors want to, that's their problem. I just don't want any of those. And half of them quoted me things, oh, I hear their noise, and I hear they're dangerous, and I hear they have toxic chemicals. And I think it's, so when we talk about protecting the neighbors, we need to be realistic and study what's really impacted, what really made it, and how dangerous it really is. And, because there's a lot of hearsay.
But we're also writing these regulations based off this comprehensive plan right here,
Right.
which we just rewrote this last winter,
Right,
or went through to see if we needed to make any changes.
right.
And in the comprehensive plan, it states pretty clear that the people of Jackson County would like Jackson County to stay a manually production agricultural-based county. And I know that you call solar panels agriculture, but a production agricultural county. So that's why we thought, following in line with the comprehensive plan, 1, not spread out all over the county, taking productive land out of use. I get that there's transmission lines, but you can graze under a transmission line, farm under a transmission line, a lot easier than you can graze and farm under solar panels.
Well, I'm assuming that this part got brought up and landowners got interested in it because it was going to be more productive and make more money than cattle.
And that's great, but
Farmers probably, people with good land aren't going to do these. They're not going to do it. But I think there's a lot of range land around here that once that, when they found out they could make more money, they'd leave it. I didn't find any of the neighbors that I thought for sure were older, we're talking about more money. They, so.
But it's about more than money. I understand.
Well, yeah,
If they came knocking on my door, that's a hard number to throw away.
Right.
The problem is it, they don't make any more money. And, I mean, it's just the scope of the project that,
It's just a shame. Yeah, because
Well, I
I
apologize
see
to
it as
you
technology.
for coming into this process late. But we have went through this and come to things that we're comfortable with, and you're gonna have to work pretty hard to change that.
Thank you.
I'm just,
And let me suggest this.
I'll just save a lot of arguing on
I
that.
know, I went home and I was like, oh my God, I didn't, that's why I went to talk to my neighbors, because I was a little surprised.
Let me suggest this. If any of the new members think something should be changed, make a motion. If he gets a second, then we'll discuss it. And we don't need to sit and discuss a lot of things, and we're not gonna take action. Okay?
Well, yeah, we came up to the sizes, like, I don't know why we had to talk about the sizes. Thank you.
Right? Any other questions from new members?
I'm good on pages 1 and 2, I just have one more question on page 2. All two members.
What page, I'm sorry?
Page number 3, paragraph 15, talks about the wildlife corridors. Um, That's probably where, what you guys are calling the wildlife corridors, is probably a lot of where the fire departments are gonna have problems, because that's where your grasses are gonna be, that's where your timber's gonna be, that's where your low-lying areas that have water in them. So, it doesn't really talk about whether it's leaving them the same. It just says, if constructed breaks and continuous fenced areas other than for roads. But if you fence off an area, you kind of impose it and make it harder to enter. Whereas now, we just drive through the field, we're down the field, they can get into it. But it doesn't make a good area for solar panels to be. But if you build fences on 3 or 4 sides of that, you kind of limit. So I didn't know what your guys' thoughts were on the wildlife corridor.
Well, I think that's just been a definition, and it's, I think, that it's talking about it.
Kind of did, but it didn't really
The-
describe any better what was going to be done with left or how it was going to be changed. Or that they were going to make sure that there's access to it.
Right.
Which is kind of an unusual piece considered solar farming. They'll just put a fence around it and that way the wildlife can still move through and they'll have their area to hide. But that's one of the things that I thought of, like the wildlife corridors is, in this definition, that's where we're going to have our problem. If we have something that is down. Then we'll have a motion to make whether Dick could just, would bring it up for
So
something
she
to think about.
pulled up permeable fencing. Does that help?
What's this plan?
So that's just definitions.
Let's see, planned wildlife corridors is on page 16, so let's look at that and see what that.
I guess, Chris, what you're asking is, as a firefighter, do you want specific access I mean, because if you were to go to a burn, a out of control wildfire, or, a passion burn that was a full section that had multiple fences in it, would you have to go to a gate every time, or would you, if you needed access into a place that didn't have a gate, a ditch,
Yeah.
you cut the fence to go through it?
We like to, but this is all ground that's been used for years, and people, farmers and us have moved around it for years, so there's access. But when you bring in a project this size, you just start changing accesses, you start changing ditches, and you start changing waterways, you start changing a bunch of the layout. But I just don't want, I don't want to forget about those areas and make them unaccessible to us. Because if they're leasing the ground, they're gonna lease the farm, and they're not gonna use any of that, so it's just gonna be forgotten about. But fire works its way up the fence line, into a ditch, and it works into that, and we can't gain access, and we're there for hours waiting for it to come out. I just don't wanna set up that scenario.
Would you pull up what you thought?
I don't know this illusion, I just.
Right. And that's where, I think that the fire, emergency services plan maybe totally, hold up the beast,
Okay.
or something an agreement that the commissioners come up with. Or, I don't know, I understand what your concerns are, for sure.
So that's.
But it was the definitions that you,
Plan and
Well, on
physical.
page 19, section 8, I think it kind of says that the project summary's got to include all that. Whether, access drives, emergency ingress, egress, all of that.
Look at page 11, too.
What's that?
Which one did you?
Page 19, I'm sorry.
Page 19.
Yep, yep.
Well, page 11. Page 11 has the wildlife corridors where it had. Shall be provided as determined necessary.
And we didn't require any type of fencing around the project, only around critical electrical. So we're not saying that the entire thing has to be fenced. If it's in a place that's unfenced now, they're probably not gonna build a fence around the panels, just around the critical, inverters, transformers, whatever.
And that would be smaller than the
I would say that, because it has to be chain link fenced. I mean, so they wouldn't have to put chain link around the entire 2,000 acres. It would just be around that. And that would allow a wildlife corridor and basically leaving areas, not stacking the panels for miles on end, leaving a gap in the middle that they can travel
They're
through.
gonna put a fence around it, or if they do, it doesn't say they can.
There is no requirement in here to fence the panels.
It might be beneficial for them to fence it in to protect their assets, right? We're talking about a lot of money in there, so if they do put a fence in. I mean, I get exactly what you're saying, there's no requirement to put them, but if they do put, there's no requirement that they, there's nothing that says they don't have to, there's nothing to say that they.
That would be in the plan,
There's nothing to say they can't though.
that would be in the plan, they submit to council.
Right.
It seems like I've seen something about that they have, there's signage every so often.
What do you want me to look at, sign or
Well,
fencing?
Yeah, we're fin-
I didn't see anywhere that says they have to put a certain kind of fence, it just has to be wildlife friendly around the corridor.
Fencing their 21 results. How many more fencing?
definition.
Fencing, like, to take away from.
Talks about what?
Screening landscaping.
The screening, when they talk about the screening, right?
On their screening landscaping. Jason, you look at that too.
Page 10, or page 9.
Understand, yeah.
Yeah, I was looking at it, they number 4. That's right, I'm for fencing.
Can you guys see that okay? All the results there? You see something, tell me it won't be there.
So yeah, go ahead, bumper fencing.
This one? Page 10, 7, this one?
So I'm not sure what this is requiring that talks about.
That's using a fence as a visual buffer.
So there has to be a visual buffer. They can have some options where they can use some trees, berms.
Yes. If they use fencing, then that's the type of fencing that would have to be used. Would be at least 75% visual solid.
And that would be a fence with probably a woven fabric. Yes. Number 9, I guess it was number 11, page 11, number 9, so it says, properties containing CSECS are being enclosed by perimeter fencing to restrict unauthorized access.
I'd like to make a motion, we change number 9's first sentence concerning fencing. Number 8 says as required, critical stuff will be fenced with chain link fence. But for the perimeter, maybe we should leave that a little more open here. Because restricting unauthorized access is a little more of a law. Perimeter fencing as utilized, as needed, as required for the, because if it's just a bunch of solar panels out there, they might be able to. I think that's too restrictive.
Yeah, I mean, I would, the terminology used there is not gonna work because in order to restrict unauthorized access, that's an 8-foot chain link fence required for the entire project.
Right.
So I would say to not put the requirement around the entire project.
I mean, if I'm a neighbor though, that's good to have a fence there, it's what we, I don't see it, I drive down the road, drive out, you know, we have to, things move, you know, the layers are different. I mean, that's there for 2 different reasons, to keep people out, and also to make it look like it's not there.
And I think the intent, my intent, with most of these is to locate this as far away from population as possible. And so if you put 2,000 acres out in the middle of somewhere, I don't think that there's going to be a need for a visually buffered fence around the entire project. If this goes where it could possibly go, I'm 5 miles away from it, and I can see the entire thing from my house. So visually buffering, that is not going to happen. But I wouldn't want to require that type of a fence around the entire project. Won't allow wildlife crossing. You have to have a gate every quarter mile for fire access.
You have a road, you have a road borders too, because I think we need to look and see, I don't even know much about where these things going to go, maybe I need to do some research on that.
Well, that's part of where this is totally separate from that, but yeah,
But
it's in mind. I mean,
well, it's,
because this could go, we've said that if this one fails, or they decide they don't want to do it, it could go over there, it could go up there, and
yeah.
so it's all got to be written with that in mind. But I do agree that changing that first sentence, I don't know what you're asking,
I'm trying to come up with, I'm trying to come up with a better solution. Because right now, restrict unauthorized access, that means you need serious fencing.
I don't see where they're gonna, I don't see where we can have from the perspective of something who's, if you're looking at somebody who's gonna run it, so I would think they're gonna want fence. That's keeping people going and breaking the road.
Position, or you have to be changing, or you have to be all, or
I think it has to be, I think, the laws don't know whether that has to be
section.
That would eliminate the wildlife. I mean,
Right.
Isn't Jackson County a fence out, not a fence in?
it's a fence in, fence, Kansas is fence out, fence in, meaning you're both required. If I have livestock and you don't, I have to fence my livestock in, but you also have to fence them out. So that's why it's a mutually, from what I understand, I'm not a lawyer, but it's mutually inclusive in Kansas.
I'm gonna double check that. I had a case years ago, and I think I found a statute that required fencing out. And not fencing in. And I brought that up because if I'm right, and if you're right, either way, then they're gonna have to fence it,
Well,
or they're still gonna, may suck
and that's where, I mean, it's either way.
Yeah.
If you have livestock, they've got to be contained. But I think that in this sentence, we're not talking about livestock.
Right.
Because if I have a Kansas legal fence is 3 wires, and that is enough to sufficiently keep livestock out. I don't think that's what that sentence is saying.
No, it's not.
And I don't think we want to prevent that. That's up to the company. But I don't think that they're worried about realistically, somebody coming in.
Let me
and breaking
suggest,
8,000 acres.
you wanna change the language, why don't we mark that to come back to it?
I
You
think you
bring
just
this
said, I
language to the
Yeah, I
next
think
meeting.
think you just said it, that the perimeter should be required, the perimeter fencing should be at least a minimum required by Kansas law.
Well, I know, but
why do we need?
there's a potential that it could go on a piece of farmland that doesn't currently have a fence, and there's no livestock around it. What are they trying to?
Right. Yeah, we don't, they don't need the fence in, sort of.
That's why I say I don't know that we should put any requirement
For fence,
for fencing, other than the critical
right,
parts of it.
so, for number 9, I'd like to move that we just take out,
So where it says R2.
Could you say-
But may,
Private properties.
Let him finish his motion.
thank you, I could use some help there. I retract that, and let me hear what you've got to say. I'm a terrible English person, I just know that reads bad.
Could you say, no, sorry, man, but
no,
to
go ahead.
say parts are being enclosed by perimeter fencing to protect critical community, or the, take A, but put something that in that first sentence.
But even on A, I look at A as shouldn't we change where it says may be fenced? Because we want
Make it
that
shall,
stuff fenced,
make
right?
it shall, mandatory.
Right. Well, like wherever into the transformers or, whatever. To me, looking at that, the maybe fence says, well, if you want to fence it, you can, but you don't have to if you want to. 11 or 8.
A. But yet in the first sentence, we require
We
fencing.
require a heavy duty fence.
Right, right. You're talking at number 9, like right.
Right.
So,
If we just fix.
so if we put on properties containing CSCCs, right now it says are to be enclosed by perimeter fencing to restrict unauthorized access. If we put may be enclosed by
Shall.
perimeter fencing to restrict unauthorized access, and then down there where it talks about the critical electrical equipment, instead of may, that should be shall be fenced or.
Right. I agree with that.
So I'm changing R to may.
Right, so strike out R2.
Okay. R2. And then it's
I think what you're talking about, to go back, that A is just saying, you may use chain link top of the barbed wire. That's sufficient to meet the requirement of
But
So that's what we're saying is that's what we want.
So, and,
We
right,
want to require that.
and that's standard practice for high voltage. So, I'd like to make a motion to change it to that.
I think we should come back to it myself. I'm confused on whether you've got other areas in here where you're requiring this buffer area. They can use a combination of berms and fence and trees and stuff. And the reason why we're not requiring a perimeter fence is what's the downside? So you're gonna have a solar farm, we think it should be fenced.
Should be or should not be?
Why shouldn't it?
What should we do? I like it as a firefighter because they can move around more free and not have a fence that contains.
If you want one of them,
So we love our fences, we cross them all the time. And if it's water right over, that doesn't stop us. The chain link would stop us. I can't drive a pickup with a 90-inch 7-foot tall chain link. Very flimsy. But I can drive through the bottom of our fence. I'm not gonna make any friends with it, but I can do it. If it's a life or death situation.
So is there anything in our safety plan that addresses that? It talks about on page 119, the age. Is that where? Because I'm saying that if they put a fence in, it doesn't, it's still in the same boat. And if they don't put a fence in, then we're not doing really injustice to people who live close by if they have a fence. So I'm just trying to weigh that, those different things.
Absolutely. I personally wouldn't put that kind of money in the field and not have a fence. That person would have.
it would be better than having cameras.
I mean, that's the thing, in order to restrict unauthorized access, it's gonna have to be an 8-foot chain link fence and razor wire. And I don't think we want that over 2,000 acres
Right.
due to the wild, I mean, because there's gonna be an impact study on the wildlife,
Right.
that how is this gonna displace them? If you do that, that's gonna displace them.
So they wouldn't be, if I'm correct here, if is it KWHE? Okay, if they recognize this is a corridor, they're not gonna allow a fence to be in that it's not permeable, right? And so that fence would have to, they're not gonna allow them to put solar modules in there either. Right?
They'd have to leave a wildlife corridor, whatever.
And so if they were gonna put a fence in there, then they would stop that fence, go around that section, leave that open, and then do another fence square to keep it from going, right? I mean, if you were,
And that's why I said, I don't foresee that happening, that they would fence it like that. I just,
I could do some looking at some other hard stuff.
On the,
It might just be practice.
I've looked at from the road a lot of arrays and systems that are set up. And there's lots of grass growing in between them and they're enclosed. It's really, you have to, if you were gonna go and try to be malicious and do something, you'd have to really work hard.
But you saw fences around?
Oh, yeah, I think that is kind of the standard. Most of them have
That's what we're talking
fences and
about.
that's, and I think it's unnecessary.
but
When
read,
you talk about trying to be rural, I think we
could we, going back to the definition where it talks about buffer fencing, is it says that the fence can't be more than 30%. Okay, so it says,
Page down.
page 10 is where it starts. Says such fencing shall be used in combination with other screening methods, but shall not be the primary method, which shall mean for the purposes of this subsection, the fencing shall not be used to screen more than 30% of the views required to be screened. So, is that, if it's a perimeter fence, but it's also a buffer fence, you couldn't fence the whole thing, or couldn't fence more than 30% of that buffer then, right? I mean,
But I think that the buffer fencing is only used for around residences or to limit visibility of some of them.
right,
It should be a very small area.
okay, I see what you're saying.
In fact, it's
Because if there's, I guess if there's not anybody close, you're saying they can still fence the whole thing. And if there's not anybody within the setbacks and all that, they would need the buffer fence.
Right, they wouldn't go to the expense of putting that type of a fence in.
Right.
They're gonna plant some trees, ferns. So we did write that, they leaves it open, just whatever it takes to do.
But wherever it needs to be, and maybe it's in the emergency services plan, it needs to stipulate that if the property is fenced, there needs to be access points every certain distance.
In and out.
So that if they come in and they say, yeah, we want to put up an 8-foot chain link fence around the thing, and then they've got 2 miles of fence, and then he comes in and says, wait a minute, how are we supposed to get in? We need to put that in there somehow. So that that's written in the beginning.
Is there a way to talk to anybody that does these and does these to get more of a visual of what this stuff is talking about?
This body can call any witness if this body wants to call.
I mean, I've done some small.
It would answer
In
a
one
lot.
work session, or would we have to be in a?
Well, I mean, that's personal research too, and you can research something and come back to us and say, well, I talked to this person and whatever.
To draw a
And
line,
like you said,
so
it's
you
just-
can visually see this.
And
I would go put eyes on it.
I would venture to guess that the fencing around this would be the least of our concerns probably. As far as, I don't know that they're gonna fence the entire thing other than maybe the 5-foot part of it.
Any other questions about fencing?
Just to clarify one point, that was made on page 18 of the emergency services fire and safety plan, 8A. As I read it, everyone did it, page 18, at least on my copy, at the very bottom, 8A, is an apple. It does say that there must be a plan which includes emergency ingress, egress. So does that answer the question about
The fencing.
how to
Access.
how to access?
Answer the question.
This may be-
It's on page 19.
Oh,
It does say emergency ingress and egress, but it doesn't give a number. Like, you need to have one on all 4 sides, or you need to have one every so often.
Right, so that is, it's right, so it's body,
is there a regulation there? Is there some kind of, I mean, is that a life safety thing written in your life safety code? I know that for buildings, right? You know,
Yeah,
Fish
buildings,
eggs.
like on land, we know our farmers, and we know this guy's like to put them in on top of the hill, so we go to the hills to find his gates. We know these guys like to put it in the corner. We know these guys like to put all their gates on the south side. I mean, there's not really a rhyme and a reason why they put gates. It just works with their land and how they use it. But I think if we were gonna put up 8-foot chain link or something, we can use.
That's where I say that if certain type of fencing is used, there needs to be an access point every quarter mile or half mile or whatever. But I don't want to require it, that they can use that.
And it's written to require drives plural, meaning more than one.
Well, they're required to locate, to have a schematic of where they're located, but we're not, there's no requirement of how often they are.
True.
Then which side?
But still, that definition would have to have at least two, which drives is plural.
Well, that, yeah.
And that would be a plan for David's.
And as part of the plan, they have to
Just
submit.
Recommendations.
Right, because each project is gonna be different, right, so they'll have that plan.
So we still have time to look at it and make changes when the time is.
Well, no, when they make their application to the commission, you're gonna have the opportunity to review it. And if they didn't have sufficient access, you could bring that up to the commission.
Submit that plan.
Right, it's an individual plan.
And if there's certain things that you see there, like, absolutely have to happen, maybe it needs to be put in here.
It would be part of that conditional use. Just like,
This can't cover every possible scenario, so it has to be broad enough to say, you need this plan submitted, that's more specific.
And that plan, who's that go to? Okay, and then we go into this, okay.
And the plan is
just like
to
when you submitted
has-
yours
has
last
to
month, that you have to
follow
say, well,
everything
I've
that
got
we've
this,
written.
describe access and we're, okay.
And then they
this
submit it
is
to the
whatever.
commissioners,
So you would do
and
that.
they said, then they can
Submit
modify.
that plan, this is how many acres that they're putting in, this is where it's gonna be. This, then you'll know where the access points are and whether that's gonna work, and you can say, okay, we need an access here, we need one here, we need.
Okay.
Individually based on that specific project.
And frankly, the lay of the land.
Yes.
Because every piece of it.
Okay? Next question?
Page 3. Section 2, paragraph 1, halfway down on the right side, the sentence starts, it is the intent of these regulations to address major issues associated with the project. However, these regulations shall not forbid and instead shall be read to expressly allow modifications to any allowed permit to address unique conditions, additions of requirements substituted performance as long as these modifications and as much they may preserve the public health and welfare, protect the human beings.
Okay.
I'm not a legal word here at all, but to me, that's just a great big gray area. That you can say, yeah, all the regs say this, but that one sentence, you can fall back on the bottom of the question and say, well, we don't have to follow the regs, we can make special allowances and changes to the permit. Am I wrong or not?
The only thing I could say to that would be this commission can change year to year. And if you don't give them the leniency to make additions or modifications, then they're tied to this, and who knows what 10 years from now will look like. So it says that these are the regulations, but yet we as the body here are allowed to, based on the conditional use permit, are allowed to make changes.
Okay, so that's what this sentence is saying, is
To me, that's
that
what.
both sides can make allowances.
Well, it
We
doesn't
can
say
make more
more.
stringent requirements or lighten,
Yeah,
maybe depending on.
right. And I think that is not on the operator, that is on this, the county commissioners or the planning commission.
Right.
Get to make those changes. I mean, if they come in and say, hey, you know, you limited us to 2,000 acres, but we've got this project where we can put 3,000 acres. Can we do that? Then we could say, yeah, that makes sense, or no, that doesn't make sense. But that allows this commission to make changes based on these,
Yeah.
the way I see it. It's not locking things down.
Yeah, because they come in here and say, well, listen, you said that we didn't have to use that fence there. So we don't have to use that fence. And people say, no, in this situation we do, or whatever. So they can't.
Based on that conditional use permit. Because that's where this is regulations, but there's a whole other step that has to be gone through in order to do this, and that's the application for the conditional use. And that's where we can put all of them.
I think we can maybe put it where that way on for reference.
Okay.
Thank you for clarifying. That was really-
Sure. Next question?
I had a question on the vegetation. You guys talked about that much. About the requirements.
What's your question?
I don't think we spent much time on that. We kind of accepted what was written here.
What is your question?
Well, I was wanting to look to see what, I know that there's certain vegetation there.
Have you had a motion to change it?
I'm just gonna have a comment, ask a question about it in the motion.
Has to be in the form, don't change something, it has to be in the
I don't
form.
want
No,
to
just this is a
If
discussion.
you want to change it, it does.
Well, but we're talking about
Okay.
it. It's all right. Just-
Yeah, I don't know what he's talking about.
I know that, like there's certain vegetation that promote, bees and, endangered type of insects that would be beneficial for in solar applications. Because that land's gonna be taken out in 30 years or whatever, so what is that vegetation? Kind of vegetation that promotes environmental. Just something to look at, I'm just something, I've heard that, that's a thing. And I'm not sure what that vegetation is, but.
And I guess I spoke too soon on saying we didn't talk about it, but the conversations I think that we had on vegetation was not requiring a specific type of vegetation. Are you talking around and under the panels? Namely, it kind of said in here about native grasses and things like that. Well, we said we do not want 5 foot tall native grass in or around these panels. That's a fire hazard, just whatever. We kind of decided that it was more cool season type grasses. It would be greener longer, and less growth, things like that. We did not want a requirement for the types of vegetation that would promote those kind of things. They want to do that, that's fine, but we're not going to require it because we don't want it to be classified as agrivoltaic.
And that's what that would do.
If we required it, it could open the door to calling it agrivoltaic. And the reason behind that, since one part of that discussion was that can change the tax base of those properties. And in my opinion, the whole reason of doing this is that it benefits the county. And it would keep the taxes at a lower rate by calling it that. And so we decided that by not allowing agrivoltaic, that would allow that bump up in property tax, so the county would get more benefit out of this project. So if they want to promote bees and things like that, they're more than welcome to. But there's no.
But if you, I didn't realize that, so the county requires it.
Next question?
Page number 4. Paragraph F. So the report from the Jackson County Road and Bridge Civil Engineering concerning impact on infrastructure. Is that saying that,
Whatever.
page number 4, paragraph F? I'm just asking this question because I got my butt in a hot seat for driving fire trucks over bridges over bridges. And it was a long conversation for a long time, but we don't have, that's one of the reasons we have to buy small fire trucks and do it, is because we don't have bridges that support stuff. So is this saying that somebody's gonna come in and look at the route that they're gonna have to use as a haul roads and bring in the equipment, the steel, the laser and stuff?
Say somebody will do that.
We're just saying.
Those are what we're requiring to happen in order to apply for the permit. When you apply for that, you have to have these things.
That's what I was reading, I just want to make sure. Because I learned real quick, you know, that fire trucks over bridges.
And that's limited for just the construction process, though.
Yes.
I think that was.
Yeah.
So is there anything after that that would be a concern that you bring up? He's talking about fire trucks.
I was just hoping.
That would be a county, I mean,
County
you should, the fire department should know what bridges they can go over and what they can't. That's not the responsibility of the operator, I guess. If there's a bridge in this project that is fixed, then they would have to fix it to do that. And then at that point, it will be safe for the fire trucks.
That was good.
Get some bridges fixed.
Get some bridges that have some weight on them.
Well, the way I read that, they'd have to prove that the existing structure was sufficient, and they'd have to replace it.
Right.
Okay, good. Then I like the way it's worded.
Any question?
All right, page number 5, paragraph 3. We talked about the codes and building standards, and it talks about they will be inspected to make sure they uphold the international building, international fire, international electric. Who's doing the inspecting? Do we have a county person who does that?
We were discussing hiring somebody to come in and do those inspections.
Okay.
And that
That the county's
would be
gonna
paid,
hire?
that would be paid for by whatever company.
Okay. So they would be hiring their own inspector?
No.
No, we would have to agree to
But
that.
on, the way I would look at it, yeah, on some of this stuff, the operator would have to hire their own inspector to come in and take a look at some of like the electrical stuff and all that.
During the construction
Well,
process.
to get the sign off on, it's good to flip the switch.
Or the inspection, however often that is.
Because some engineering firms require a weekly and a monthly, and they have 2 different levels. But to follow the international building, international fire, and national electric, that's what they need. So I didn't know if, I didn't mention it anywhere else, I didn't know if we had an inspector or if the county was paying for it. I mean, obviously the company would pay for it, there's, if they were hiring the inspector or if the county was hiring the inspector.
I think they would be paying for it, the company would be paying for it. I don't know if it was discussed that it would be a third-party inspector.
Okay. So I didn't want that to fall back on some of the fire departments to make sure the fire goes is there.
That's a good point, because right now there is no county person that's any of that stuff, so.
I guess that's one thing that I brought up, that county should, the county's gonna hire a person, just like, I mean, let's say they go out and they start construction and they don't do the dust control, who are they gonna call? What person is gonna take charge of that? To me, that would be,
Project manager.
Yeah,
yes,
county's gonna hire a project manager.
and it would be paid for by the company. He would be out there to make sure that all the regulations are followed, that everything's, I know we haven't written anything out, but that would just, I think that's necessary.
We have to clarify that just a little bit. Obviously, it's up to the county, board of county commissioners, but the model that's being discussed, or they have here, I don't know about the board of county commissioners, is that the company would pay for that position would be a county position, so they would report to the county board of commissioners, they would not report to the company.
Right.
They'd be under the direction of the board of county commissioners, just to clarify that point. The company would pay for it, so they pay whatever their county says they should pay for that position.
And I think the way I would understand this is that is stipulating what codes they're required to follow. So it doesn't come in and say, well, it's the state code, or, you know, it's the international building code, international fire code. Those are what they have to follow. And that's the only thing that's, it's just telling what has to be followed.
Next question.
page 5. Section 3, paragraph 1C. I highlighted under 10% of the equity interest. It's page 5, paragraph 1C, I guess. You guys have it highlighted 10% of the equity interest instead of 18. What does that mean?
It's right there. It's right
And
there.
I look at that as that if anybody, the shareholders within the operator or owner, partnership or corporation, anybody who's more than a 10% shareholder of that company, needs to be listed, and needs to show that they're in good standing with the state that they incorporate in the business. That's what I would.
That's what it says.
When we added the 10%, or the commissioners added the 10%, or it came to us with the 10%?
That's the way I think it came. And we have a couple of different copies of this, but most of what we changed would be highlighted and struck. So if there's nothing done to it, then that's the way it came to us.
Yes, mine doesn't have it, but that one, it was
She just highlighted
Right.
Oh, you highlighted it.
Yeah, so you all can see.
what you were talking about. She was right on top of it.
Yeah, I know.
Trying to be.
Thank you.
Here's the original, let me see. It's got my notes all over it.
Next question.
All right, page number 6, paragraph 3B. It says that a commercial size project may not be within 2 miles of another one. So we're talking about one project, 2,000 acres, going back a couple of acres, right?
So really that can be taken out.
So are we saying that there's only gonna be one project, or is there a possibility of 2, but you're limited to 2,000 acres and 2,000 acres and 2,000 acres?
Because it says one 2,000 acre site.
So you're saying what's the point of saying 2 miles away from another one if we're only gonna have one,
Or maybe I was misunderstanding what the
In
definition.
the original one, there was no one. It was just 2,000 acres total. We put in the one,
Okay.
so yes, we could strike that. Because there is going to be multiple CSNCS.
It's struck.
So then struck out. Change, maybe change. And this one I was a little confused, and this one down C. Page 5, or page 6, 3C. When the project extends, the solar array may be more than 1/2 mile from the other array, so that makes sense. The project area may not take up more than 70% of the project extent.
Strike that too, Kevin.
No,
No?
because the extent is the total area. That's the 2,000 acre, or that's basically what that says, is the area can be 2,000 acres. But that means they have to have 2,500 acres for the extent.
I got you.
So this would be the 2,000 acres, but they would need 30% more.
What about here in the
Yeah,
MOU construction of that, that's yards and stuff?
That's right.
so that's,
so the 2,000 acres is 70% of the total project extent.
The extent is the overlay district. Right?
Kate handed this back out, about a month or 6 weeks
Oh,
ago.
yeah.
Yeah. I don't know, this was after the members.
Yeah, well, I think that was a
Joined, might have been that first night.
Yes.
So, that's where some of these definitions that she's tried to indicate.
Yeah.
Here's what this,
in the definitions, the area is the total impacted area, and the extent is all land contained in the site project.
So the extent is gonna be greater than that.
Yeah, so they may have 5,000 acres leased, but they're only can operate on 2,000. It just, this extent would cover all of those areas.
Next question.
So we're not putting any regulations on the vegetation in between, so see, whether we agree or disagree with that. That's right.
Well, it's shall that requires to be planted and maintained in either vegetation or weed mat or gravel or whatever, but it's managed to prevent erosion of ground. That was the entire part of that was to require them to manage it to prevent those things.
Well, imagine the more slope where the site is, the more gravel they need, the more flat it is, the more vegetation.
Depending, yeah.
Next question.
Page number 8, paragraph B at the top. The removal of stands and mature trees shall be limited and shall comply with the environmental protection standards in this code with an emphasis on maintaining soil and minimizing erosion. Obviously, trees create shade. Shade's going to be the enemy of the soil. But is there any way that, and I know that every piece of ground, slope and distance and low areas and all that all has something to do with it. But is there something that we're gonna be okay with doing in addition to moving mature trees? Because it doesn't really talk about it other than one other area, and it just says as little as possible.
Well, what's the standard for sure trees?
That's the end. Just,
Yeah.
I'm not really.
And I think that is the way, it says to try to shy away from those areas.
Yeah. But I guess again, waiting until the plan comes in, looking at it and then trying to decide, okay, we're talking about moving 80 acres of or whatever. And then
Next question.
So I guess right there, page 8D at the top, any pesticides and herbicides, again, they'll probably be put out on the plan. And then we can say area at that time. That'll all be part of the plan, though.
Site plan and noted on the.
It says on the plan. That's why.
Because I know in Billy, we don't have a lot of water, we don't have a lot of rural water, and a lot of people on the wells. And that's gonna be a big issue.
Which we, some point in here, are asking for a baseline well sample within a quarter mile of the property.
Like, I see what we're doing. Okay, and then page 8, 7C, after rough grading, and then at the end it says vegetated, and then there is nothing after the end. I don't know if that was something that got missed or taken out. Or if the end was talking about the end.
I think it's just the types of, yeah, it's the formatting, I think after the semicolons, a lot you'll see and, if it's wanting all of those.
Tie those two together.
So I don't know, do we need to
guess that's what it's with. Stormwater prevention, technology.
There is a section here coming up. Page number 9, paragraph D. There are any residential parcels of land within the project extent that are not owned by the operator or under the agreement with the operator. So is the operator actually purchasing land in the county?
Well, I think so. But we're not prohibited.
Well, if that's what they, under any other agreement, would be the lease.
Okay. So that's what it's saying, is underneath the lease, there would be,
Yeah, if there's land outside that's not owned by the operator or leased, and so that's called a non-participating parcel. Meaning, I think the way I would see that is if, in this, if you had a piece of land here in the middle, and they were on 2 sides of it, then the setbacks would have to be increased to 50 feet along the property lines of those, if they're adjoined on 2 sides. However, with the 13, 20-foot setback, that pretty much eliminates a lot of that.
Is it spelled out in one, does it say?
so it would have been, what is the word setback? So it would have been 450 feet if they wanted to sell it.
Well, I didn't think we were done talking about that. The 13, 20 setback. That's where we,
Still a couple pages back.
It's right there, I mean, are you bringing it up?
now, hold on. He's doing a good job over there. I thought that's what we did at the last meeting, was we were talking about the setbacks, and we got it. The new people were asking all kinds of questions. And so no, I wasn't. I am concerned that we're not having too high setbacks unnecessarily. And I'm just waiting for him to get to some of it, letting him go through his question.
So wait for me to answer my questions. I'm just trying to wrap my
You're
head
doing
around
it,
it.
right,
And
I really appreciate the.
We're going through this kind of in order, and
Yeah,
these questions, and the setback is right there in B.
So, yeah, why is it 13:20? Why is the reason for 13:20?
Isn't 1320 in that a quarter of a mile?
Is it to try to keep them from seeing it?
It was just to give the non-participating landowner a little bit more of a buffer and something that they don't want.
One effect of the 1320 is that it's going to mean that there's going to be more, in order to come up with, if the company, whoever, needs to come up with 2,000 acres, it's going to take them more square miles to come up with those 2,000 acres. So there's theoretically, possibly going to be more non-participating landowners that are participating.
Or
Under a certain
it moves the project into a specific site that can handle that.
Maybe. So,
And, I mean, this goes back to where you talked about it last time,
right.
and then we, weren't able to talk about it, but,
Right. So here we are. I think it's excessive. And they can still see it. It's not like they're hiding it.
it's not based on that,
Right. I think we need to have a real good reason for telling one owner they can't use 1,300 feet of their land. We need a good reason.
Well, you know.
it's only 320.
That brings up an issue. If you want as much land ag as possible, then you go back to 1,000 acres. because that makes more land available for agriculture.
No, the 1320 eliminates certain properties.
1320 takes more land out of ag.
It means that an 80-acre parcel won't qualify.
Well, that's
Because-
true.
Because they.
But it also is taking more land out of agricultural use, by definition.
Well, I like his talking, yeah, when I was talking about it. It is agriculture.
Tell me about the 80 acres, I'm trying to figure out.
180 acres is typically a quarter mile wide and half mile long. So if it has a quarter mile setback, there's no place in that 80 acres that you could, if there was non-participating owner on both sides. So what it's doing is it's condensing the project into more participating owner type properties, so that the person that's got 40 acres in the middle of this thing doesn't get surrounded by something that they don't want, and it completely devalues their property. So it moves it into larger tracts rather than smaller tracts.
If you had 80 acres, if you wouldn't be next to it, whereas this, it wouldn't meet the setback.
Right, it couldn't meet that setback.
Because the setback would be onto the participating
Right. So there's-
person's property, so that property's already out of agriculture use. If it was 1,000 feet, or if it was 13.
And it's
still
also,
farm it though?
it's also to as well. Yes,
You
you
can
just
farm
can't
the
put solar,
setback.
just can't put solar panels.
You can still farm the setback.
So if anything, it's increasing the amount of agricultural land.
That's how you look at it, right?
I mean, they're still only gonna be able to put 2,000 acres of panels on. It just eliminates certain tracts of land from being included in the project. Because they can't, and that setback is from a dwelling. I think it does mention non-participating as well. Because it says the
So
solar
what the
panels
owner can,
shall be located at a minimum of 300 feet from any existing non-participating property line. The 1320 is from an existing residence.
and it does say in there that the lesser setback, unless this lesser setback is agreed to by the owner of the residence, so that the owner can say, no, bring it as close as you want.
Right.
Okay, so you should provide
If
protection.
you get a
but
signed
also-
agreement with the company, and then if you sell your house, then that follows, the next owner would have to,
Or you can give a temporary easement. You don't necessarily have to run the land.
Well, the new owner couldn't move the panels because the previous owner signed an agreement with them. They couldn't come in and say, wait a minute, that doesn't follow the setback. Well, they signed an agreement that said they allowed. So,
I think what you say makes sense.
the basis of it is, in the scope of this project that's out there, it moves the project more into a less populated area, and there's less non-participating. And if this project wasn't there countywide, it would move it to a place that that it would affect the least amount of people. Essentially, it moves it into a
Moves it out of Jackson County.
piece of property that, could be one of the most beautiful pieces of property in the county. It could have sold.
I don't think
But again, it's
Florence area is good looking.
not, it's native.
I guess I didn't realize that's what it is. So they're proposing one spot and then it's shifted to different. I didn't know where they're talking about.
And realistically, I hate to talk about the project because that's not.
Right, you
Why?
should.
Well, I didn't want to talk about either, but it does say in here that it is limited to one, so that obviously that brings it right up to say, okay, this is the only one that's ever going to be allowed for these regulations, so it does become a site-specific type of regulation. instead of septic, it's just so wrong, right?
A couple of pages that, in case, document, that might be illustrated, I'm just looking at northwest. So I was thinking here, 1,000, the red areas are the, take you not the red areas are the ones that,
That's the buffer area. There's 1,000
yeah,
foot
so
buffer.
the unshaded areas are the areas that would be eligible for whatever setback project.
Essentially, Jackson County is there's not a lot of large land masses left. It's all divided up into 40 zones.
Sure.
And it's a tough spot to try to put 5,000 acres. And so going to the comprehensive plan, in order to keep Jackson County looking that way, or in that realm, is to limit the scope of these projects, so we don't ruin the aesthetic of the county for a small minority team.
So under 1,000.
I think some of that is making assumptions, but
It's not losing that by.
Who knows what it's gonna look like in 30 years?
See how much less is.
I hope it's still be here in time.
So,
Oh, yeah.
which one of these spots,
We don't know.
I mean, like, let's say you get.
it's only the eyes, easy in the eyes of the holders, right? I think there's a lot more people, once something gets out there, and they realize, I'm just frustrated. I'd like to see us be able to more
Did you need to see that?
I do, it's in my case.
Smaller.
That's
That's it.
Which area did you need to see?
Just because it isn't easy in the eyes of the holder.
But it does affect the county.
Right, well, when you talk about property values, now you're saying something possible to look at.
I mean, and essentially, this is all in the hands of a few people. You know, you said it the last time. The really think somehow needs to come to a vote of the county, whether they
Right.
want something.
Yeah, that's what I. So I think,
I
just think it's too late. So excessive, there's somebody who's living, somebody working on a motion.
Right. And that, we can't predict the future. You know, somebody says, well, I'm gonna build a house down there 30 years from now. And, well, sorry, you can't pick every site that somebody may build a house on. You know. So it's just a general start here today. But on most of these properties, that setback will protect them. Because
Okay, next question?
I guess I'd like to bring one up, and I know it seems like those papers that we get, you know, most of them are on setback and decibel levels. And I know we kind of skidded over the decibel as a group. And I think maybe we need to address that and talk about it, and get something. Fine.
Not to cut you off there, I think that's where, those are some of the topics that Dick initiated or in the beginning that we needed to hammer down. But yet we have a lot of other new questions to come in. Yes, but that, I mean, that's one of the ones we need to nail down.
And we'll get to that once we start going through it. I just thought we'd try to clear up all the questions.
Get
New members.
everybody up to speed on where we're at, I guess.
So, any new member have another question? Speak up.
you guys have answered
It's
all
hard
of
Look
to-
at Alex,
it's hard to
speak up.
listen and
Don't be
talk.
shy.
that whole being able to see the plan before it goes into effect, you know, the application, that's answered a lot. And there's the difference.
Yeah, that was the very first thing was acceptance of these regulations does not mean that a project's going to happen. That's a whole other process.
Okay. That'll be my next question on page 12. Whole being able to look at the plan here, talking about the noise, and I was gonna say, what you were saying, is a lot of the feedback, solar feedback forms are about the noise. But I've never seen that large, I've seen large solar farms from a distance, but I've never been up close. Has anybody ever been up close to one?
Dick was going to take a vacation for one.
Well, I'm reconsidering, and I'll bring this up now. I was gonna bring it up the next meeting. Conflicts, I was contacted by the company, that may be putting in this, an offer to pay my way, to a couple of locations, and I turned that down. I just didn't know that was
I could say I've stopped at 2 solar panel arrays, and you couldn't hear zero.
How big
Where
of an
were those
operation?
at? And how big?
29, Interstate 29.
the
Oh,
commissioner.
no, not
didn't-
big.
but
So
I think-
the transformers would be the only noisy part. So setting a low decibel number is not going to be hard, is not going to be a hard push. Solar panels don't make noise.
That's what we're saying is
The
that
transformers do,
it's
and
the,
they'll be easy to put back.
but that's what, trying to protect us. And moving the project into a less populated area makes that whole lot easier as well.
It's going to be easy to make this a good number.
I mean, my transformer makes noise. I can't hear it from 500 feet away, but I've got an 8 kilowatt system. It's not 500 megawatts.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the scale makes a big difference.
Right,
Because you got a lot more.
Mine hovers, it buzzes,
right.
but the box is this big.
So nobody in this room has walked up to a large solar scale project and walked through it. I have not. I've seen them from a long distance, but I've never been close.
Yeah, I couldn't get close to the transformers, and that's where the noise would be.
Depends on what large is. I mean,
Isn't there a pretty good size one down by Lawrence?
That's 20 acres, I think.
Is that all it is, one?
I don't know.
You know, there's one on 59, when you turn off 24 to go to Oskaloosa. It's not, it would be, probably fall under the personal, is it? And then there's one, as you get off of the turnpike, that is Hallmark Cars in Lawrence. Once again, I don't think it would be a good judge, because it's not very big either.
I think there's one in Wamego somewhere, but it's small, 5 to 10 acres or something.
Yeah, the big ones I've seen are out in California.
Since this project started, I've been getting season around all over.
Travel is
Well, I think I mentioned earlier, I got Douglas counties, and they're 60. And as I said, I'm pretty comfortable with that. I'm assuming they would have done deep research into this.
And I think also that with the setback, it also eliminates, because we're talking 500 feet away, but the setback's a quarter mile. So,
They're saying the 60
But we still-
decibels is measured at the property. So if you're a quarter mile away, you can still hear 60 decibels, that's pretty high.
Right. That's crazy.
That's where I was getting hung up on. If you're a quarter mile away and still breaking 60 decibels, that's making some noise.
I said we could lower it.
You're required to wear hearing.
well,
Well,
it's
you're not, 60 decibels.
lowering,
By OSHA definition is a normal conversation between you and I.
Really?
Yeah. So 60 decibels is not near as loud as we think it is, but I didn't mean to cut you
No,
off.
it's-
But Bob, you brought up a point in our earlier meetings that if we went out there and stood where a project's gonna be right now, when we go out there, when the project's in, it should sound just the same
That's what I
as it
think.
does
Exactly,
right now.
yeah.
And I think that's something that, yeah, should be the aiming for. Whatever the noise was before it went in, that should be the noise after it's in.
But you're gonna allow for those, for transformers, because you're basically electrical equipment.
But they could be located far enough away to not affect that property line. And it's the whole thing, being able to sit on your back porch and enjoy the birds singing and not have to listen to that. So it's moving it far enough away that you can still have that peace, whatever.
Is that the only noisy part of the solar farm is the inverter? The transformers and inverters? I mean, they're talking about moving their panels.
Yeah, I mean, there's gonna be motors and stuff when they move.
But they're not.
But they're moving with the day, so they be so slow that I don't know if you hear it or not,
I've never seen them actually running.
but maybe it'd be a constant.
No, the new ones, they use low battery power motors. The tennis, cable Wi-Fi between the inverters and the sun sensors, they just need to rush it all the way.
That's not a diesel motor out there running.
12 hours a day.
Some of them use a motor, one motor, and they run an axle all the way down through it. And it just spins the whole thing all over. So those are people around it. It's just
And that can be located at the far end of the direction. I think with the setbacks that is able to be.
What I'd like to see is take, as far as the noise level, take the decibel reading out of it completely. And put in that whatever it is, like I said before, you know, it's kind of like the wells, you know, have a baseline reading between 1 and 3 o'clock, I don't care what time you pick. And whenever it's put in, it should be the same.
I'm not certain how we would measure,
You go out there with a decibel,
right, but how would you determine where the measurement points are? To start with.
well, you need to do property line or do the
Well,
structure.
wouldn't 500 feet be the, from an existing array, that'd be your measured point, right?
Yeah, but that 500 feet could be anywhere.
Well, and with the setback, there can be no array 500 feet from the road.
Yeah.
But that's still saying that if the decibel level is 300 decibels at a quarter mile away, then at 500 feet, it can still be 60 decibels. So, just because they put all the transformers a quarter mile away from the house, they can still have more than 60 decibels at the 500 feet. So, you still have to have a distance to measure from.
What's
It sounds hard to get a baseline on. I mean, it just is, you know. You just don't know what.
Once you do it properly, well, it says that the property line.
And yeah, the baseline on that on sound is difficult.
It is.
Because if it happens to be on Wednesday at 2 o'clock when the fighter jets fly over, you pick that, you know.
That's what I'm saying, I think you ought to do at least 3 times, at 3 different readings. So then you do have a baseline, that you can work from. You go from the property line. I mean, I'd hate to buy property and be living on it, and then all of a sudden this comes in and, you know, I can't go over here because it's too loud, so I have to go back over this direction. Just my thoughts.
the board set it at 60 decibel or
That's what it came in as. We just highlighted that we needed to discuss it, I believe.
And 60 decibels is a normal conversation level.
Yeah.
It's like a freezer line.
light rain 40, or whisper is 30. I think we just put in a light rain number, lower that number to something that's reasonable. I think it's gonna easily be taken, it's gonna be easy to take it.
I hate to see us lower.
Yeah, I was surprised when you said 60
If in
was
fact the noise is lower, that's great. But just make sure it's not higher than that level. And I think we do need that level in there. Any more discussion on 60 decibels, or should we go on the next question?
I think I'd like to make a motion that we lower the 60 decibels to 50. I'd say we lower it to 40. But that's right, it's supposed to be.
Okay, here a second.
I second that.
Discussion.
That's the thing that ought to be zero. I don't think there should be a
There's
decibel.
no zero.
Very possibly though, I don't know that you'll ever get a zero baseline reading. There will
No,
be
you
some-
wouldn't.
Somewhere in
Minimum, some-
I understand that, but what I'm saying is whatever
Right.
it is now, that's what it should be after it's built.
And I think
Well,
so,
if you go out-
if you take it down to
If
40
you
and
go out from
500 feet.
2,000 acre tract right now, you're not gonna have much noise.
Right,
Right.
so
But
for the light rain is.
I don't want to assume that that's the way it's gonna be. You know, I know what you're saying, if you go out there, there may not be, but what if there is?
And it does say further down in here that it should be, or must be placed, you know, so that you put the equipment as far away as you
I
can.
understand.
But yes, we need to, yeah.
But
The 60.
I guess I just bring this up, and it's kind of off the subject. But they came out by my area where I was building a house and wanted to do rural water, put in a building. And I said, okay, what about all this pipe that you're gonna put out there? Well, we may not put any out there. They didn't say they would, didn't say they wouldn't. And then my thinking is you're gonna have rats and mice and so on. So, I mean, it needs to be specific so that it happens the way you want it to happen. Not just, well, you know, it might happen, it might not happen. Or we wouldn't do that, but they won't put it in writing that it wouldn't happen. You know what I'm saying? So that's just my thoughts.
Is there an ambient decibel level that is based, is there an ambient level that's you can go off of? I mean, you're talking about no more than 15 decibels over the existing ambient level. What is the ambient level? It's not like
Well, that would be the baseline that Bob's talking about at the beginning. If you go down and
Can I make a suggestion? So this isn't probably accurate because it's a stupid app, right? On my phone. But if we just sat here and let that fan run, it's at 53, 54. When I talk here, it's at 80. When Bob talks, it's around 60.
Well, if I'm sitting in the yard and I hear that, and that's the feel, so that's what you're hearing.
I don't think we're living at the 60 that was in the original document. Part of the reason that statement is not set. That one was,
I don't want to have to listen to you.
if you didn't have that before, if all of a sudden somebody parked that fan in your back porch, that's what,
Right. I do like listening to the ordinance.
and I don't know that you could ever get a zero, you know.
No, I don't think you won't.
And in essence, the more restricted we are on certain types of things, moves it further away from populated areas.
Well, and that's why I was it's a problem in the world, because it's not gonna be an issue. But he's bringing up a good point, people are gonna read these regulations when they post them, and they're gonna read 60, and they're gonna react just like I did. 60 sounds like a lot, we need to go to the meeting and raise it.
But we decreased that, so that should make it better. Right, I mean,
It's been moved and seconded that we reduce the decibel level from 60 to 50. All in favor, say aye.
Hang on, I thought you said
I
40.
even shoot low, I said 40 after.
Okay, I'm sorry,
Well,
40.
this is something that I just looked at.
Because 40 is called a light rain.
This says that, like in Wichita, it says residential zones are 55 dB, from 8 AM to 10 PM, commercial zones are 60 dB, 8 to 10, light industrial is 70, 8 to 10 PM, industrial zones are 80, 80 to 10 PM. Medium by 5. So,
in the city, where you would expect that noise.
It's not in my house.
Residential, and
residential during the day, it's 55 to 50 at night. Is what they, and this just talked about.
How about if you don't have the battery storage and the sun's not shining in the evening, then the transformers and the inverters are probably not going to be making any noise at night.
Good point.
Yeah, but in just another month, the sun's gonna be up till 9 o'clock at night. So you're, you know, you're in his home, the sun's still, you know.
Yeah.
Further discussion? We moved and seconded that we reduce the decibel level from 60 to 40. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Guess you better have a show of hands. All in favor, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Motion passes. Well, it's 2 minutes to 8.
Any other questions? Any more questions?
I've had enough questions for tonight. You can stay and talk if you want to. I don't have to be here.